The woman crouched behind the water trough had a pistol in her hand and murder in her eyes. And Xander Dalton knew right then she was either going to shoot him or herself before the sun went down. It was August 1878 in Malad City, Idaho Territory, and the heat shimmered off the dusty main street like waves on an invisible ocean. Xander had come down from his mountain cabin for supplies, his pack horse laden with furs he aimed to trade at the general store. He stood 6 feet 4 inches tall, his shoulders broad as an ox yoke, muscles built from years of surviving in the wilderness alone. His dark hair hung past his collar, tied back with a leather cord, and his beard was neatly trimmed despite his isolated existence. He had learned long ago that looking like a wild animal made folks nervous, and nervous folks did stupid things. The woman behind the trough was young, maybe 23 or 24, with auburn hair that had come loose from its pins and hung in tangled waves around her dirt-smudged face. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, revealing an ugly bruise that made Xander's jaw tighten. Her green eyes darted from him to the saloon doors and back again, and her finger trembled on the trigger. "Easy now," Xander said, his voice low and calm like he was gentling a spooked horse. He kept his hands visible and away from the knife at his belt. "I am not here to hurt you." "That is what they all say," she hissed, and he heard the tears beneath the anger in her voice. "Stay back or I swear I will shoot." Before Xander could respond, the saloon doors burst open and 3 men stumbled out onto the wooden sidewalk. The one in front wore a deputy's badge that gleamed mockingly in the afternoon sun. His face was flushed with whiskey and something meaner. "There you are, Katherine," the deputy called out, his words slurring slightly. "You had your fun, girl. Time to come back inside and finish what you started." "I started nothing, Harlan," Katherine said, her voice shaking but defiant. "You grabbed me when I was trying to do my job serving drinks. You tore my dress. You put your hands where they had no business being." The deputy laughed and his companions joined in. "Your job is whatever I say it is. Now come on. I paid good money for a bottle and your company." "I am a waitress, not a whore," Katherine said, and Xander heard the desperation creeping into her tone. She was losing her nerve, and when that happened, someone was going to get hurt. Xander stepped forward, placing himself between Katherine and the 3 men. He had not planned on getting involved in town politics. He made it a point to stay out of such things. But something about the way the woman held herself, the exhaustion and fear warring with stubborn pride, reminded him of a wildcat he had once found in a trap. She had fought until her last breath, refusing to surrender even when surrender might have saved her. He was not about to let this woman fight alone. "The lady said no," Xander said simply. The deputy's eyes narrowed as he took in Xander's size. Most men backed down when they saw Xander up close. He had the kind of build that came from hauling water, chopping wood, hunting game, and surviving winters that could kill a man if he was not careful. His arms were thick with muscle, his chest broad and solid, and his hands were calloused and strong enough to break bones if necessary. "This does not concern you, mountain man," the deputy said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. "Go back to whatever hole you crawled out of." "I will," Xander said mildly, "right after you go back inside that saloon and leave the lady alone. She is not a lady, she is a saloon girl." "She said she is a waitress. Seems to me you should listen." The deputy's face darkened. His hand moved toward his gun and Xander tensed, ready to move. But before anyone could draw, an older man stepped out of the general store across the street. "That is enough, Harlan," the man called out. His voice carried the weight of authority despite his slight frame. He wore spectacles and a shopkeeper's apron, but there was steel in his expression. "We have had enough trouble in this town without you starting more. Stay out of this, Grayson," Harlan snapped. Cannot do that, Grayson said, walking closer. That girl has been working for me when she is not at the saloon. She runs errands, helps my wife with the inventory. Katherine Lane is a good worker and a decent woman trying to make an honest living. If she says you crossed a line, I believe her. Other people were emerging from shops and houses now, drawn by the commotion. Xander saw a woman with a baby on her hip, a blacksmith still holding his hammer, a pair of older men who might have been town council members. The deputy looked around and seemed to realize public opinion was not swinging his way. This is not over, Harlan said, pointing at Katherine. You owe me, girl. Nobody makes a fool of Harlan Pierce. He turned and stalked back into the saloon, his companions following with backward glances that promised trouble later. Katherine lowered the pistol slowly, her whole body starting to shake now that the immediate danger had passed. Xander turned to face her, moving carefully so as not to startle her. Are you hurt? He asked. She shook her head, then nodded, then seemed to give up on answering altogether. Her eyes were huge in her pale face, and Xander could see her fighting back tears. Grayson approached, his expression kind. Come inside, Katherine. My wife will make you some tea and we can figure out what to do next. I cannot stay here, Katherine said, her voice barely above a whisper. He will come after me. He is the deputy. Who is going to stop him? The sheriff, Grayson began. The sheriff is Harlan's uncle, Katherine interrupted. You think he will take my word over his nephew's? Grayson's silence was answer enough. Xander found himself speaking before he had fully thought through the implications. You can come with me. Every eye turned to him. Katherine's were the widest. Up to my cabin, Xander continued. In the mountains. It is about a day's ride north. You would be safe there until things cool down or until we can figure out a better solution. I do not know you, Katherine said, but there was a flicker of hope in her voice that hurt something deep in Xander's chest. No, you do not, he agreed. But I give you my word that I mean you no harm. I live alone. I have done so for near about 5 years now. I trap, hunt, trade furs. I come to town maybe once a month for supplies. I am not looking for a wife or a servant or anything else, just offering you a safe place to catch your breath. Why would you do that? Katherine asked. Xander considered the question. Why was he doing this? He valued his solitude. He had built his entire life around avoiding exactly this kind of complication. But when he looked at Katherine Lane, with her torn dress and bruised shoulder and the pistol still clutched in her trembling hand, he knew he could not walk away. Because it is the right thing to do, he said finally. And because I reckon you deserve someone keeping their word for once. Katherine looked at Grayson, who nodded slowly. Xander Dalton is a good man as far as I know, keeps to himself, but he is honest in his dealings. I have traded with him for years, never heard a bad word against him. I will pay you, Katherine said to Xander. I have some money saved. Not much, but no need, Xander said. Just grab whatever you need and we will head out. The sooner we are gone, the better. Katherine nodded and hurried into the boarding house next to the saloon. She emerged 10 minutes later with a small carpet bag and a determined expression. She had changed into a different dress, something more practical for riding, and had pinned her hair up properly. The bruise on her shoulder was hidden now, but Xander knew it was there, along with God knew what other hurts. Grayson provided them with extra supplies. On credit, he said when Xander tried to pay. You can settle up next time you are in town. To Katherine, he said more quietly, you send word if you need anything. My wife and I will help however we can. Katherine thanked him, her voice thick with emotion, and then she was mounting the spare horse Xander had brought for carrying supplies. They redistributed the furs and goods between the pack horse and Xander's own mount, a sturdy bay gelding named Bear who had been with him for 3 years. They rode out of Malad City at a steady pace, not running but not dawdling either. Xander kept watching their back trail, but no one followed. Harlan was probably still in the saloon, drinking off his anger. With luck, he would forget about Katherine Lane in a few days. Xander did not really believe that, though. Men like Harlan Pierce did not forget slights, real or imagined. The afternoon stretched long and hot as they traveled north into the mountains. Katherine rode in silence, her back straight and her gaze fixed ahead. Xander let her be, understanding that she needed time to process everything that had happened. He had seen enough traumatized animals to recognize the signs. The tension in her shoulders, the way she startled at unexpected sounds, the exhaustion that ran deeper than physical tiredness. When the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, Xander found a good spot to camp near a creek with clear water and decent grazing for the horses. Katherine dismounted stiffly and stood looking around as if unsure what to do next. "You can gather some firewood if you like," Xander suggested. "Nothing too big, just kindling and small branches. I will get the camp set up and catch us some dinner." Katherine nodded and set off toward a stand of trees. Xander watched her go, noting the way she kept one hand near the pocket of her dress where he suspected she had hidden that pistol. She was scared, bone-deep scared, and he wondered what her life had been like to make her that way. He made quick work of unsaddling the horses and setting up his simple camp. He had a canvas tarp for shelter, bedrolls, cooking gear worn smooth with use. Then he took his fishing line down to the creek and caught 3 fat trout in less than 20 minutes. The mountains were generous, if you knew how to ask properly. Katherine returned with an armful of wood and stood watching as Xander cleaned the fish with practiced efficiency. He got a fire going and soon had the trout sizzling in his cast iron pan with a bit of salt and some wild onions he had collected along the trail. They ate in silence as the stars began to emerge overhead. The temperature dropped quickly once the sun disappeared, as it always did in the mountains. Xander added more wood to the fire and poured them each a tin cup of coffee from the pot he kept warming on the coals. "Thank you," Katherine said finally, "for what you did back there, and for this." She gestured vaguely at the camp, the food, everything. "You are welcome," Xander said. "Why do you live alone?" Katherine asked. "You seem like you would be good with people, but you choose to stay away from them." Xander took a sip of his coffee, considering how much to share. "I had a family once, back in Missouri, a wife, a daughter. There was a fever that came through one winter. Took them both within 3 days of each other. I buried them and then I just started walking. Did not stop until I reached these mountains. That was 1873. I have been here ever since." "I am sorry," Katherine said, and the simple sincerity in her voice was more comforting than any elaborate condolence. "It was a long time ago," Xander said, "though sometimes it felt like yesterday. What about you? How did you end up in Malad City?" Katherine wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, staring into the fire. "I came from Virginia originally. After the war, things were hard. My father lost everything. He died when I was 17 and my mother followed 6 months later. I had an aunt in California, so I saved up money and bought passage on a wagon train heading west. But when we got to Idaho territory, I got sick. Something I ate," the wagon master said. "They left me at Malad City with barely enough money for a room and told me to catch up with them once I recovered." "But you never caught up," Xander said. "By the time I was well enough to travel, they were long gone. I had no money for another wagon train and winter was coming on, so I stayed. Got a job at the boarding house, then started waitressing at the saloon for extra income. I have been saving to go to California, but it never seems like enough." She laughed bitterly. "Now I have lost even that job. Harlan will make sure I cannot work anywhere in town. Then you stay with me until we figure something out, Xander said. The words came easily, naturally, even though he knew they changed everything. Katherine looked at him across the fire, her green eyes searching his face. You really mean that? I do not say things I do not mean, Xander replied. What will people think? A man and a woman alone in the mountains. There are no people where we are going, Xander said. Just trees and sky and silence. Let them think whatever they want, they will anyway. Katherine was quiet for a long moment. Then she said very softly, I have not slept properly in 2 years. I always keep one ear listening, one eye watching. Even in my room at the boarding house, I kept my door barricaded. Every footstep in the hall, every raised voice from the street, I would wake up ready to run or fight. I am so tired of being afraid. The admission hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Xander felt something shift in his chest, some locked door he had thought sealed forever creaking open just a fraction. You can rest at my cabin, he said. I promise you that. Nothing will hurt you there. I give you my word. Why should I trust your word? Katherine asked, but there was no accusation in her question, only genuine curiosity. Because it is all I have, Xander said simply. I lost everything that mattered once. The only thing I have left is my word, and I will not break it. Katherine nodded slowly, and something in her posture relaxed just slightly. It was a small thing, barely noticeable, but Xander saw it and felt absurdly pleased that she was beginning to believe him. They finished their coffee, and Xander banked the fire for the night. He gave Katherine his bedroll and one of his extra blankets, then laid out his own sleeping space on the other side of the fire. It was not terribly cold yet, and he had slept in worse conditions. Xander, Katherine's voice came soft through the darkness. Yes. What was her name? Your daughter. Rose, Xander said, and felt the familiar ache in his chest. She was 4 years old. She loved picking wildflowers and chasing butterflies. She laughed at everything. She sounds beautiful. She was, Xander said. Sleep now, we have a long ride tomorrow. He listened as Katherine's breathing gradually evened out, though it took longer than it should have. Even in sleep, she was not fully relaxed. He thought about what she had said, about always sleeping with one eye open, and he made a silent promise to himself that he would change that. Somehow, he would help her feel safe enough to truly rest. The next morning dawned clear and cool. They broke camp efficiently and were on the trail by the time the sun cleared the eastern peaks. The terrain grew steeper as they climbed, the trail winding through stands of pine and aspen. Xander pointed out landmarks as they rode. A rock formation that looked like a bear's head, a meadow where elk gathered in the evenings, a lightning-struck tree that served as a marker for one of his trap lines. Katherine asked questions, her curiosity emerging now that she was farther from Mallet City. She wanted to know about the animals he hunted, the furs he trapped, how he survived the winters. Xander found himself talking more than he had in years, enjoying the sound of another human voice and the way Katherine listened with genuine interest. You ever get lonely? She asked as they stopped to water the horses at a clear mountain stream. Sometimes, Xander admitted. But loneliness is better than being hurt by people you trusted. Is it though? Katherine asked. She knelt by the stream and splashed cool water on her face. I think loneliness is its own kind of hurt. Xander did not have an answer for that, so he changed the subject by pointing out a hawk circling overhead, hunting for its own lunch. They reached his cabin in the late afternoon. It sat in a small clearing surrounded by pines, with a view of the valley below and the peaks rising above. Xander had built it himself, cutting and fitting each log, thinking the hard physical labor might quiet the screaming in his head. It had not, but the cabin was solid and tight, with a stone fireplace, a sleeping loft, and enough room for one person to live comfortably. Now there would be two. Katherine slid down from her horse and stood looking at the cabin with an expression Xander could not quite read. "It is nice," she said finally. "Peaceful." "It is that," Xander agreed. He began unloading the horses, and Katherine moved to help without being asked. They worked in companionable silence, carrying supplies inside and settling the horses in the small lean-to shelter Xander had built. Inside, the cabin was simple but clean. Xander kept things organized because disorder felt too much like the chaos of his grief. There was a table he had made from split logs, 2 chairs, shelves for his supplies, his rifle mounted above the door. The loft was reached by a ladder and held his bedroll and personal items. "You can have the loft," Xander said. "I will sleep down here." "I cannot take your bed," Katherine protested. "Yes, you can," Xander said firmly. "It is more private up there and warmer in the winter. I will be fine down here by the fire." Katherine looked like she wanted to argue, but exhaustion was written in every line of her body. "All right," she said. "Thank you." They spent the rest of the day settling in. Xander showed Katherine where things were kept, how the fireplace drew best, where the well was for water. She absorbed everything quickly, and he could see her mind working, categorizing and planning. She was not the kind of woman who liked being dependent on others, he realized. She wanted to be useful, to earn her keep even when he had told her it was not necessary. For dinner, Xander made a stew from dried venison and vegetables he had stored in the cool cellar dug into the hillside behind the cabin. Katherine insisted on making biscuits, and though they were a bit lopsided, they tasted better than anything Xander had eaten in years. There was something about sharing a meal with another person that made the food taste different, more alive somehow. After dinner, they sat by the fire and Katherine asked more questions about his life in the mountains. Xander found himself telling her stories he had not thought about in years. The time a black bear had tried to get into his cellar, the winter he had broken his leg and crawled a mile back to the cabin, the first time he had successfully tanned a beaver pelt without ruining it. Katherine laughed at the funny parts and gasped at the dangerous ones, and Xander realized he was enjoying himself. When had he last felt this lightness in his chest, this ease in being around another person? As the fire burned low, Katherine's questions tapered off, and she sat staring into the embers with a distant look in her eyes. "What are you thinking about?" Xander asked. "Whether I will ever feel normal again," Katherine said. "Whether there is a version of me that does not flinch at sudden noises or check the shadows before entering a room." "What happened to you?" Xander asked gently. "I mean, before Harlan. You said you have been sleeping with one eye open for 2 years. Katherine was silent for so long that Xander thought she was not going to answer. Then she spoke, her voice flat and careful, as if she was handling something that might shatter. "There was a man at the boarding house. A permanent resident, been there for years before I arrived. He seemed nice at first, grandfatherly almost. He would leave little gifts on my doorstep, always unsigned, but I knew they were from him. Flowers, a book of poetry, a new handkerchief. I thought he was just being kind." She paused, swallowing hard. Xander waited, not pushing. "Then one night, about 6 months after I had moved in, I woke up to find him in my room. He had picked the lock. He was just standing there by my bed, watching me sleep. I screamed and the landlady came running, and he acted like he had gotten confused about which room was his, even though he had lived there for 3 years, and his room was on a completely different floor." "Did anyone do anything about it?" Xander asked, though he already knew the answer. "The landlady told me I must have been mistaken. He was such a nice man," she said. "Surely I was just having a nightmare, but I knew I had not been. So I started barricading my door at night, and then other things started happening. My clothes would go missing and then turn up in strange places. I would find notes that said things like, "You looked beautiful in church yesterday," or "I watched you hang laundry this morning." I never felt alone, never felt safe. "Where is he now?" Xander asked, and his voice had gone very quiet. "He died last winter. Heart gave out." I should have felt relieved, but by then the damage was done. I could not sleep, could not relax. And then men at the saloon started thinking they could take liberties because I was a woman alone with no family. Harlan was just the worst of them, but he was not the first to grab me or say vile things or corner me in the storage room. Xander felt rage building in his chest, hot and sharp. Not the explosive kind that made a man do foolish things, but the cold, settled kind that changed how you saw the world. Katherine had been hunted, harassed, violated in ways both small and large, and the people around her had done nothing. Worse than nothing. They had made excuses for the men and blamed her for attracting attention. "I am sorry," he said, knowing the words were inadequate but needing to say them anyway. "I am sorry that happened to you. I am sorry no one protected you." Katherine wiped at her eyes quickly as if angry at herself for crying. "It is not your fault, I know, but I am still sorry." They sat in silence for a while and then Katherine stood. "I should sleep. Thank you for listening." "Katherine," Xander said, and she paused at the base of the ladder. "You are safe here. I meant what I said. Nothing will hurt you while you are under my roof." She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded and climbed up to the loft. Xander sat by the fire long after she had settled above him, thinking about trust and safety and the promises he had made. The next days fell into a rhythm. Xander went about his usual work, checking trap lines, hunting, gathering firewood, preparing for the coming winter. Katherine insisted on helping with everything she could. She cooked meals, mended his clothes, organized his supplies with an efficiency that impressed him. She talked more now, telling him about her childhood in Virginia, her parents, the books she had read, her dreams of California and what she might do when she got there. Xander found himself looking forward to coming back to the cabin each evening, to the smell of cooking food and the sound of Katherine's voice, and the simple pleasure of not being alone. He noticed things about her, the way she hummed while she worked, the tiny scar above her left eyebrow, how she always poured his coffee first before her own. He noticed, too, how she was changing. The tightness around her eyes was easing. She laughed more readily. She had stopped jumping at every unexpected sound, but she still slept restlessly. He could hear her moving around in the loft at night, and sometimes she would climb down in the dark hours before dawn and sit by the fire, wrapped in a blanket, just staring into the flames. 2 weeks after they had arrived at the cabin, Xander woke in the middle of the night to the sound of Katherine crying. Not loud, theatrical sobs, but the kind of quiet, desperate weeping that came from someone who had learned to cry without making noise. He climbed the ladder without thinking, his only thought to offer comfort. "Katherine," she was sitting up in the bedroll, her arms wrapped around her knees, tears streaming down her face. "I am sorry," she said immediately. "I did not mean to wake you." "You did not," Xander lied. "What is wrong?" "I had a dream," Katherine said. "That Harlan found me. That he dragged me back to Malad City and no one would help me. And then the dream changed and it was that man from the boarding house and he was in my room again, watching me sleep, and I could not move, could not scream." Xander sat down at the edge of the sleeping area, careful to keep some distance between them. "It was just a dream. You are safe here." "I know," Katherine said, but she was shaking. "I know it was not real, but it felt real. It always feels real. What can I do?" Xander asked, feeling helpless in the face of her pain. "Just stay," Katherine whispered, Please, just for a little while. I know it is improper, but I just do not want to be alone right now." So Xander stayed, sitting with his back against the wall while Katherine gradually calmed. They talked about nothing and everything. The weather, what they would plant in a garden come spring, whether the winter would be harsh or mild. Simple, ordinary things that anchored Katherine back to the present, away from the nightmares. Eventually, she fell asleep, her breathing deep and even in a way Xander had not heard before. He waited a while longer, then quietly climbed back down to his own bedroll. But something had shifted between them in those dark hours, some new level of trust established. The weeks turned into a month, then two. Autumn came to the mountains in a blaze of gold and red. Xander taught Katherine to fish, to identify animal tracks, to shoot his rifle properly. She was a quick study, absorbing skills with the same focused intensity she brought to everything. She told him once that learning made her feel less helpless, more in control of her own fate. They fell into an easy partnership, each contributing to the household in their own way. Xander hunted and trapped and maintained the property. Katherine cooked and preserved food for winter and made the cabin feel like something more than just a shelter. She had a talent for creating warmth and comfort, for turning a simple meal into something special, for making even the most mundane evening feel worthwhile. Xander found himself watching her more often, noticing the graceful way she moved, the intelligence in her eyes, the soft curve of her smile when she was truly happy. He told himself he was just making sure she was all right, that he was being a good host and protector. But late at night, lying awake listening to her breathe in the loft above, he knew he was lying to himself. He was falling in love with Katherine Lane. The realization should have terrified him. He had sworn after losing his wife and daughter that he would never open his heart like that again, never give fate another chance to destroy him. But Katherine had slipped past his defenses without even trying, with her strength and vulnerability, her laughter and tears. The way she looked at him like he was something more than a scarred, broken man hiding in the mountains. One evening in late October, they were sitting outside watching the sun set over the valley. The air was crisp with the promise of coming snow, and Katherine had wrapped herself in one of Xander's spare coats. It was far too big on her, and she looked ridiculously young and beautiful with her hair loose around her shoulders. "I sleep through the night now," Katherine said suddenly. "Did you notice?" Xander had noticed. For the past week he had not heard her moving around in the dark hours. "I am glad." "It is because of you," Katherine said, turning to look at him. "Because you kept your promise. You said I would be safe here, that I could rest, and you were right. For the first time in 2 years, I sleep deeply. No nightmares, no waking up in a panic, just sleep." "Good," Xander said, his throat tight with emotion he was not sure how to name. "I want to thank you," Katherine said, "for everything. For saving me from Harlan, for bringing me here, for being patient with me, for asking nothing in return. You gave me back something I thought I had lost forever." "What is that?" Xander asked. "Hope," Katherine said simply. "The belief that there are still good people in the world, that not every man wants to hurt me or use me. You have been nothing but kind and respectful and honorable, even when I gave you no reason to be." "You gave me every reason," Xander said. "You are a good woman, Katherine. You deserved better than what you got in Malad City. You deserve better than what the world has given you." Katherine was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice was very soft. "So do you, Xander. You are a good man. You did not deserve to lose your family." "Life is not about deserving," Xander said. "It just is. We do what we can with what we are given." "What if we were given each other?" Katherine asked. Xander's heart stopped, then started again with a painful thud. "What?" Katherine turned to face him fully, her green eyes searching his. What if this was not just about you rescuing me? What if we were meant to find each other? Two broken people who could maybe help each other heal. Katherine, I am 20 years older than you, Xander said, grasping for objections even as everything in him wanted to pull her close. I live in the middle of nowhere. I have nothing to offer you. No money, no prospects, just this cabin and a hard life in the mountains. You have everything I want, Katherine said. You have honor and kindness and strength. You make me feel safe. You make me laugh. When I think about the future, I cannot imagine it without you in it. She paused, then added with heartbreaking honesty, I am in love with you, Xander Dalton. I have been for weeks now. If that makes you uncomfortable, I am sorry, but I needed you to know. Xander stared at her, his carefully constructed walls crumbling like they were made of sand. You are sure? You are not just grateful or confused or, I am completely sure, Katherine interrupted. I know what gratitude feels like, and I know what love feels like. This is love, Xander, real and true and terrifying and wonderful. I love you. I love you too, Xander said, and the words came out rough with disuse and feeling. God help me, Katherine. I love you so much it scares me. I thought I was dead inside, but you brought me back to life. You made me want things again. Want a future, want companionship, want to wake up every morning and see your face. I love you. Katherine's smile was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. Then kiss me, you stubborn mountain man. So Xander kissed her, pulling her close and feeling her melt against him. It was not his first kiss, but it felt like it, new and precious and full of promise. Katherine's arms came around his neck, and she kissed him back with a passion that made his head spin. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Xander rested his forehead against hers. I want to do this right, he said. I want to court you properly. I want to marry you if you will have me. I want to give you the life you deserve. You already are, Katherine said. This, right here, is everything I need. You are everything I need. They sat together as the stars came out, talking about their future. They would stay in the cabin through the winter, then in spring they would ride to the nearest town with a proper preacher and make things legal. They would build a life together, simple but full, in these mountains that had sheltered them both when they needed shelter most. When the night grew too cold to stay outside, they went into the cabin together. Xander banked the fire and Katherine climbed to the loft, but this time she leaned down and kissed him goodnight, and the smile she gave him held promises that made his heart race. That night, for the first time since losing his wife, Xander fell asleep thinking about the future instead of the past. Winter came to the mountains with a vengeance that year. Snow fell early and often, piling up outside the cabin in drifts that sometimes reached the windows. But inside, Xander and Katherine were warm and content. They spent long evenings by the fire, talking and laughing and learning each other's stories, each other's scars, each other's hopes and fears. Katherine told Xander about her childhood in Virginia, about the grand plantation that had been her home before the war, and the poverty that had followed its loss. She told him about watching her father sink into despair and drink, about nursing her mother through the illness that had taken her life. She told him about the dreams she had once had, to be a teacher, to travel, to write stories, to matter somehow in the grand scheme of things. Xander told Katherine about his own past, the parts he had locked away for so long. About growing up on a farm in Missouri, about meeting his wife Mary at a church social when they were both 16, about the simple joy of their early years together. About little Rose and her laughter, her endless questions, her absolute trust that her papa could fix anything. He told Katherine about the fever and the helplessness he had felt, watching them slip away and being unable to do anything to stop it. He told her about the guilt that had eaten at him. Should he have called the doctor sooner? Should he have done something different? Why them and not him? Katherine listened to it all, holding his hand, sometimes crying with him, never judging or offering empty platitudes. She understood that some wounds never fully healed, they just became part of who you were. Mary would have liked you, Xander said one night as they sat by the fire. She had your same stubbornness, your same refusal to give up even when things got hard. I am glad you loved her, Katherine said. I am glad you had that kind of love once. It made you who you are, and who you are is exactly who I need. I worried I was betraying her, Xander admitted, by loving you, by wanting to be happy again. Love is not betrayal, Katherine said firmly. Love is honoring the fact that she existed, that she mattered, by living fully and choosing joy when you can find it. She would want you to be happy, Xander. Any woman who truly loved you would want that. Xander pulled Katherine close and kissed the top of her head, feeling the last piece of his guilt begin to dissolve. She was right. Mary had been full of life and love, and she would never have wanted him to spend the rest of his days alone and grieving. As the snow fell outside and the fire crackled inside, Xander felt something settle in his chest. Peace. For the first time since 1873, he was at peace. Christmas came, and though they had no decorations or fancy presents, they celebrated together. Katherine made a special meal from their stored supplies, and Xander surprised her with a gift he had been working on for weeks. A box he had carved from pine, with her initials worked into the lid. Inside, he had placed a set of hair combs he had traded for during his last trip to town before meeting her. Katherine cried when she opened it, and then she gave him her gift. A shirt she had made from fabric she had been saving, stitched with tiny, perfect seams. It fit him perfectly, and he wore it immediately, touched by the hours of work she had put into creating something just for him. They held each other that night, fully clothed and completely proper, but closer than Xander had felt to anyone in years. He knew Katherine was waiting for their wedding before taking things further, and he respected that. More than that, he cherished it. She had been through so much, had her boundaries violated so often. Letting her set the pace of their relationship was the least he could do. But it was not always easy. Katherine was beautiful and warm and right there, and sometimes the wanting was almost painful. He would catch himself watching the way firelight played across her face, or the graceful movement of her hands as she cooked, or the curve of her waist, and he had to remind himself to be patient. Good things were worth waiting for. Katherine seemed to be wrestling with the same feelings. Sometimes he would catch her looking at him with an expression that made his blood run hot, and she would blush and turn away quickly. Other times, their casual touches would linger just a moment too long, and the air between them would practically crackle with tension. One night in January, during a particularly bad storm, Katherine came down from the loft in the middle of the night. Xander woke to find her standing by the window, watching the snow fall in thick curtains. "Cannot sleep?" he asked, sitting up. Katherine shook her head. "The wind sounds strange. It reminded me of something and I could not settle." Xander got up and joined her at the window. "What did it remind you of?" "People shouting," Katherine said. "Back in Virginia after the war, there were men who would ride through at night, causing trouble. You could hear them coming from far off, their voices carrying on the wind. My mother would make me hide under the floorboards until they were gone." Xander wrapped his arms around her from behind, holding her close. "That must have been terrifying." "It was," Katherine said, leaning back against his solid warmth. "But I am not terrified now. Isn't that strange? The wind sounds the same, but I am not afraid, because you are here." "I will always be here," Xander said. "As long as you want me, I will be here." Katherine turned in his arms and looked up at him. "I want to be your wife, Xander. Not just someday in the spring, but now. I do not need a preacher or a church or a piece of paper to make it real. I know what is in my heart, and I know what I want." "Katherine," Xander said, his voice rough with emotion and desire. "Are you sure?" "I have never been more sure of anything," Katherine said. "I love you, I choose you, I want to be yours in every way that matters." Xander kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, pouring everything he felt into that kiss. When they broke apart, he said, "We will still have the official ceremony in the spring. I want to do this right, want everyone to know you are mine and I am yours." "Yes," Katherine agreed. "But tonight, right now, I am already yours, and you are already mine." What happened next was tender and passionate and perfect, a joining that felt like both a homecoming and a new beginning. Xander was careful and patient, mindful of Katherine's past hurts, attuned to every response and reaction. And Katherine was brave and open, trusting him completely, giving herself fully to the moment and to the man she loved. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in Xander's bedroll by the fire, Katherine's head on his chest, his arms wrapped securely around her. "I never thought I could feel this way," Katherine said softly. "Safe and loved and cherished all at once." "Get used to it," Xander said, pressing a kiss to her hair. "You are stuck with me now." "Good," Katherine said, and he could hear the smile in her voice. "That is exactly where I want to be." The rest of the winter passed in a haze of happiness. They settled into married life without the official ceremony, learning each other's rhythms and habits, building something strong and real in the isolation of the mountains. Katherine bloomed like a flower that had finally found the right soil and sunshine, her fear and wariness replaced by confidence and joy. She was still cautious around strangers when they made their rare trips to trade at the distant trading post, but with Xander, she was completely open. She laughed freely, teased him affectionately, argued passionately when they disagreed about something, and loved him with an intensity that sometimes took his breath away. Xander found himself transformed as well. The hard shell he had built around his heart had cracked wide open, letting in light and warmth and hope. He talked more, smiled more, made plans for the future in a way he had not done in years. He started building an addition onto the cabin, thinking ahead to the family they might have someday. He taught Katherine everything he knew about surviving in the wilderness, wanting her to be able to take care of herself if something ever happened to him. "Nothing is going to happen to you," Katherine would say firmly whenever he brought this up. "You are stuck with me for the next 50 years at least." "I hope so," Xander would reply, "but I want you to be safe regardless." In March, when the snow began to melt and the first green shoots pushed up through the remaining drifts, Xander and Katherine made the journey to a settlement 3 days' ride away. It was a rough place, more camp than town, but it had a circuit preacher who came through once a month. They were in luck. Preacher Samuel Thompson was there, preparing to move on to his next stop. He was a weathered man in his 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. "You two want to get married?" he asked, looking them over with an assessing gaze. "We do," Xander said. "We have been living as man and wife through the winter, but we want to make it legal and proper." "Good," Thompson said. "Too many folks out here in the wilderness forget about such things. You got witnesses." 2 trappers who had been friendly with Xander over the years agreed to stand up for them. The ceremony was simple and quick, held in the open air with the mountains rising all around them. But when Xander and Katherine spoke their vows, looking into each other's eyes and promising to love and honor each other for the rest of their days, it felt as sacred as any cathedral wedding. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Thompson said. "You may kiss your bride." Xander did, thoroughly and without reservation, and the trappers hooted and hollered their approval. They stayed at the settlement for 2 more days, trading furs and buying supplies. Xander bought Katherine a simple gold ring from a prospector who needed cash more than jewelry. It was a bit too big, but Katherine loved it fiercely, twisting it around her finger and smiling every time she looked at it. On their way back to the cabin, they stopped at the same creek where they had camped that first night after leaving Malad City. They set up camp and sat by the fire, and Xander marveled at how different everything felt now compared to 8 months ago. "What are you thinking?" Katherine asked, leaning against his shoulder. "That I did not know it was possible to be this happy," Xander said honestly. "That I had given up on happiness and then you walked into my life or I walked into yours and everything changed." "We saved each other," Katherine said. "You gave me safety and I gave you purpose. We needed each other." "I still need you," Xander said. "Every day, every moment." "Good," Katherine said, "because I need you too, always." They made love under the stars that night, and Katherine fell asleep in Xander's arms with a smile on her face. Xander stayed awake longer, watching her sleep peacefully, deeply, without fear or nightmares. She had finally learned to rest completely, to trust that she was safe, to believe in the promises he had made. The girl who had slept with one eye open had finally found a place where she could rest deep. And the man who had thought he was dead inside had finally found a reason to live fully. Spring turned to summer, and summer brought new challenges and joys. Xander and Katherine planted a garden near the cabin, coaxing vegetables from the mountain soil. They expanded the chicken coop Xander had started years ago and never finished, adding half a dozen hens that provided fresh eggs. Katherine started talking about getting a milk cow, and Xander found himself seriously considering it despite the extra work it would mean. In July, Katherine announced that she was pregnant. Xander's reaction was complicated. Joy and terror warred inside him as he thought about his daughter Rose, about the fever that had taken her, about all the things that could go wrong. But when he looked at Katherine's face, glowing with happiness and hope, he could not let his fear overshadow this moment. "Are you happy?" Katherine asked, suddenly uncertain. "I know you lost Rose, and I know this might bring up difficult feelings, but I hoped I am happy," Xander said, pulling her close. "I am terrified, but I am happy. We are going to have a baby." "We are going to have a baby," Katherine repeated. And then she was crying and laughing at the same time, and Xander held her and let himself believe that this time, things would be different. The pregnancy was not easy. Katherine suffered from terrible nausea in the early months, and Xander felt helpless as he watched her struggle to keep food down. But she was stubborn and determined, and gradually the nausea faded. By the time autumn arrived, she was blooming again, her belly round and full, her face radiant despite the discomfort of carrying extra weight. Xander did everything he could to make things easier for her. He took over all the heavy chores, insisted she rest frequently, worried constantly about her health. Katherine tolerated his hovering with good humor, gently teasing him about being an overprotective mother hen. As winter approached, Xander made the difficult decision to move them closer to civilization temporarily. He knew Katherine would need help when the baby came, someone who knew about birthing and could step in if there were complications. They could not risk being isolated in the mountains when their child decided to arrive. They made arrangements to stay with a family near the trading post, good people Xander had known for years. John and Martha Garrett had 7 children of their own and welcomed Xander and Katherine with open arms. Martha, in particular, took Katherine under her wing, sharing wisdom and reassurance about the coming birth. The baby came in February during a cold snap that froze the creek solid. Katherine labored for 14 hours, and Xander paced outside the room like a caged animal, remembering another birth, another child, and praying desperately that history would not repeat itself. When Martha finally called him in, he entered the room expecting the worst. But instead he found Katherine propped up against pillows, exhausted but smiling, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. "Come meet your son," she said. "A son." Xander moved closer on shaking legs and looked down at the tiny red face of his child. The baby's eyes were scrunched shut, and he was making little snuffling noises that sounded absurdly loud in the quiet room. "He is perfect," Xander whispered. "He is," Katherine agreed. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy, but now, looking at his son, Xander knew exactly what felt right. "Thomas," he said. "Thomas Daniel Dalton, after my father and yours." "Thomas," Katherine repeated, testing the name. "Yes, that is perfect." Xander reached out a tentative finger, and the baby's tiny hand wrapped around it instinctively. Something in Xander's chest cracked open even further, some last piece of scar tissue finally healing. This was his son. His and Katherine's. A new life, a new beginning, proof that love could survive loss and create something beautiful. "Thank you," he said to Katherine, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for this, for him, for everything." "Thank you for giving me a life worth living," Katherine replied. "For loving me enough to make me believe in happy endings." They stayed with the Garretts for another month while Katherine recovered her strength. Thomas proved to be a healthy baby with powerful lungs and an appetite that kept Katherine busy. Xander marveled at how naturally she took to motherhood, how confidently she handled feeding and changing and soothing their son. In late March, when the worst of winter had passed, they made the journey back to their cabin. It felt like coming home in a way it never had before. This was not just Xander's refuge anymore. It was their family home, the place where Thomas would grow up, where they would build their life together. The years that followed were full and rich. Thomas grew into a sturdy boy with his mother's green eyes and his father's dark hair. He was curious and fearless, always getting into things and asking questions about everything. Katherine homeschooled him, teaching him to read and write and figure sums, while Xander taught him to hunt and fish and track animals through the forest. When Thomas was 3, Katherine gave birth to a daughter they named Clara, after Katherine's mother. Clara was quieter than her brother, more thoughtful, with auburn hair that caught the light and a smile that could charm anyone. 2 years after Clara came another son, James, who was the most adventurous of the 3, and gave his parents regular heart attacks with his climbing and exploring. The cabin had to be expanded twice to accommodate the growing family. Xander built additional rooms, a bigger sleeping loft, a proper kitchen. What had once been a hermit's refuge became a real home, full of noise and laughter and the chaos of children. Katherine flourished as a mother and wife. The frightened woman who had once slept with one eye open was gone, replaced by someone confident and strong. She still had moments when the past rose up. A stranger approaching too quickly could make her tense. Certain sounds could trigger old memories, but they were rare now. And when they happened, Xander was there to remind her she was safe. In the summers, they would sometimes make the long journey to Malad City, so Katherine could visit with Grayson and his wife, who had become dear friends despite the distance. Harlan Pierce had left town years ago, disgraced after being caught stealing from the sheriff's office. The irony of his downfall was not lost on Katherine, who felt a certain satisfaction in knowing he had brought about his own ruin. On one of these visits, when Thomas was 10, Clara was 7, and James was 5, they walked past the saloon where Katherine had once worked. She stopped and looked at it for a long moment, and Xander wondered what she was thinking. "Are you all right?" he asked. "More than all right," Katherine said. "I was just thinking about that girl I used to be, the one who stood behind a water trough with a gun in her hand," convinced she had no future. I want to tell her that she does, that she will fall in love with a mountain man who will keep all his promises, that she will sleep deeply and safely for the rest of her life, that she will be happy beyond measure. Xander put his arm around her shoulders and pulled her close. I think she knows, he said. I think she made the right choice that day. We both did, Katherine said, looking up at him with those green eyes that still made his heart skip. We both chose to take a chance on each other. That night, lying in the boarding house bed with Katherine beside him and their children asleep in the next room, Xander thought about how far they had come. From two broken people barely surviving to a family full of love and hope. From loneliness and fear to partnership and joy. He thought about the promises he had made that August day in 1878. He had promised Katherine safety, promised she could rest, promised to protect her. He had kept every one of those promises, and in return, she had given him back his life. The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of mountain living and the milestones of their children's growth. Thomas grew tall and strong like his father, eventually taking over many of the hunting and trapping duties. Clara developed her mother's talent for creating warmth and beauty, filling the cabin with wildflowers and handmade decorations. James became an expert tracker, able to follow trails even Xander sometimes missed. When Thomas was 18, he started courting the daughter of a family that lived in the valley below. Xander and Katherine watched with a mixture of pride and bittersweet awareness that their children were growing up, starting to build their own lives. Are we old now? Katherine asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. It was a ritual they had maintained for years, this quiet time together at the end of each day. I suppose we are, Xander said. He was 56 now, his hair more gray than dark, his body carrying the aches of decades spent working hard in unforgiving conditions. But he was healthy and strong, still capable of everything that needed doing. I do not feel old, Katherine said. She was 38, still beautiful, though there were lines around her eyes now and silver threads in her auburn hair. I feel like we are just beginning. In some ways we are, Xander said. Thomas will likely marry soon and start his own family. We will be grandparents before we know it. I like the sound of that, Katherine said, leaning against him. Grandpa Xander, Xander laughed. Sounds strange, but I suppose I will get used to it. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the light fade from the sky. After a while, Katherine said, Do you ever regret it? Bringing me here that day. Your life would have been simpler if you had just ridden past. Not once, Xander said firmly. Not for a single moment. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Katherine. You and our children. You gave me back something I thought I had lost forever. What is that? Katherine asked, though she probably knew the answer. A reason to wake up in the morning, Xander said. A reason to work hard and plan for the future and care about what happens tomorrow. You gave me back my life. You gave me mine too, Katherine said softly. I was so scared that day in Malad City. Scared and alone and certain I had no good options left. And then you appeared, this mountain man with kind eyes and a promise to keep me safe. You changed everything. We changed everything, Xander corrected. Together. Katherine turned and kissed him, a kiss that held decades of love and partnership and shared struggles and triumphs. When they pulled apart, she rested her head on his shoulder and sighed contentedly. I sleep so well now, she said. Every night deep and dreamless. No fear, no nightmares. Just peace. Good, Xander said, wrapping his arm around her. That is exactly how it should be. Thomas did marry that valley girl, a sweet young woman named Emily who fit into their family as if she had always belonged. They built their own cabin a mile away from Xander and Katherine's, close enough for regular visits but far enough for independence. Within a year, they had their first child, a boy they named Xander after his grandfather. Holding his grandson for the first time, Xander felt the cycle of life come full circle. He thought about little Rose, his first daughter who had died so young, and he knew she would have loved being an aunt to these children. The pain of her loss had never fully disappeared, but it had transformed into something gentler, a sweet ache rather than a sharp agony. Clara married a few years after Thomas, a blacksmith from the trading post who moved to the mountains to be near his bride. They built their home on the other side of the property, and soon the mountainside was dotted with Dalton family cabins, all within sight of the original home that had started it all. James chose to stay unmarried longer, content to help his father with the trapping and hunting while he figured out what he wanted from life. He was 22 and restless, talking about going to California to see the ocean, maybe to find whatever fortune Katherine had once dreamed of seeking there. "Let him go," Katherine said when Xander worried about James wandering off alone. "He needs to find his own path, just like we found ours." So they let James go with their blessing and enough money to get him started. He promised to write regularly, and he kept that promise. His letters described cities and landscapes and adventures that made Katherine laugh, and sometimes cry with joy that her son was getting to see the world she had once longed for. Meanwhile, Xander and Katherine settled into the comfortable rhythm of grandparenthood. Their cabin was regularly filled with grandchildren, and Katherine delighted in spoiling them in ways she had never been able to spoil her own children in those early, lean years. On a crisp October evening in 1903, 25 years after they had first met, Xander and Katherine sat in their usual spot on the porch. They were surrounded by family. Thomas and Emily with their 3 children, Clara and her husband with their 2 various friends and neighbors who had gathered for a harvest celebration. As Xander watched his family laugh and talk and play together, he felt profoundly grateful. His life had been marked by tremendous loss, but also by tremendous love. He had known the depths of grief and the heights of joy. He had been broken and remade, had learned that healing was possible even when it seemed impossible. Katherine caught his eye from across the porch where she was holding their newest grandchild, a baby girl named Katherine after her grandmother. She smiled at him, that same smile that had been lighting up his life for a quarter century, and Xander felt his heart swell with love. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and they were alone in their cabin, Katherine came and sat beside Xander by the fire. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" Xander asked. "For keeping your promise," Katherine said. "You told me I would be safe with you, that I could finally rest. You have kept that promise every single day for 25 years. I have slept deeply and peacefully beside you all this time. You gave me the gift of safety, and I will never stop being grateful." "You gave me the gift of love," Xander said. "You taught me that it was possible to love again, to trust again, to hope again. We saved each other, Katherine." "Yes," Katherine agreed. "We did." They sat together by the fire, holding hands, watching the flames dance. Outside, the mountain wind sang through the pines, a sound that had once reminded Katherine of shouting men but now just sounded like home. The cabin was warm and solid around them, filled with years of memories and love. Katherine rested her head on Xander's shoulder and closed her eyes, completely relaxed, completely at peace. The girl who had once slept with one eye open was long gone, replaced by a woman who knew she was loved, protected, cherished. She could rest deeply now, safely held by a love that had proven itself over and over across the years. Xander pressed a kiss to Katherine's hair and closed his own eyes, feeling the same peace. He had been a man adrift, lost in grief and loneliness. But Katherine had anchored him, given him purpose and joy, filled his life with meaning again. The fire burned low and the night deepened, but neither of them moved. They sat together in the cabin that had become their whole world, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had built together. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys, as all tomorrows did. But tonight, they simply existed in this perfect moment of contentment and love. The mountain man had promised safety, and he had delivered. The woman who had been so afraid had found her courage. Together, they had created something beautiful and lasting out of pain and fear and chance. And every night, wrapped in each other's arms, they rested deep. The years continued their steady march. Xander and Katherine grew older, their bodies slowing but their love remaining constant and strong. Thomas took over most of the physical work of maintaining the property, with James helping when he returned from his travels. Clara and Emily made sure their parents never wanted for anything, bringing food and help and grandchildren who kept life interesting. When Xander was 68 and Katherine was 50, they celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary with a gathering that brought together 3 generations of family. Someone suggested they tell the story of how they met, and their grandchildren gathered around eagerly, always ready to hear the tale again. Grandpa saved Grandma from a bad man, the youngest grandchild announced importantly, having heard the simplified version many times. "That is part of it," Katherine said, smiling. "But really, we saved each other." "Tell us the whole story," one of the older grandchildren begged. "From the beginning." So Katherine and Xander told the story, trading back and forth, filling in details for each other. They told about Malad City and the water trough and the deputy named Harlan. They told about the ride to the mountains and the cabin and the slow process of learning to trust. They told about falling in love, about promises made and kept, about choosing each other again and again across the years. "Grandpa promised Grandma would be safe with him," Katherine said, looking at her husband with all the love in her heart visible in her eyes. "And he kept that promise. Every single day he has kept that promise." "I just did what any decent man should do," Xander said, uncomfortable as always with being painted as a hero. "You did more than that," Katherine said firmly. "You saw a woman in trouble and you helped her even though it would have been easier to walk away. You gave me shelter and safety. You were patient with my fear and my nightmares. You never pushed, never demanded, never made me feel like I owed you anything. You just loved me and let me heal at my own pace." "Because I loved you," Xander said simply. "It was never a burden, Katherine. It was a privilege." Their grandchildren watched this exchange with rapt attention, sensing something important in the way their grandparents looked at each other, spoke to each other, loved each other even after so many years. "Is that what real love looks like?" one of the older granddaughters asked. "Yes," Katherine said. "Real love is patient and kind. It is keeping promises even when it is hard. It is choosing each other every day, not just once. It is being willing to be vulnerable and to see someone else's vulnerability as precious rather than weak. And it is knowing you are safe enough to rest," Xander added, squeezing Katherine's hand. "Your grandmother taught me that love means creating a space where someone can finally put down their guard and just be." The anniversary celebration continued long into the night, full of food and music and laughter. But what stayed with everyone who was there was the visible love between Xander and Katherine Dalton, a love that had endured and deepened across 3 decades, a love that had created this whole family and community. As the evening wound down and people began to leave, Thomas pulled his father aside. "You and Ma," he said, "you two have the kind of love people write songs about. I hope Emily and I are half as happy as you are after 30 years. You will be if you work at it, Xander said. Love is not just a feeling, son. It is a choice you make every day. Some days that choice is easy, some days it is hard. But if you keep choosing each other, keep putting in the effort, keep being honest and kind, it works. Did you ever regret leaving your solitude? Thomas asked. You had a whole life set up before Ma came along. Not once, Xander said without hesitation. I was not living before your mother, Thomas. I was just existing. She gave me back my life, and I gave her a safe place to live hers. That is what love does. It makes both people better, fuller, more themselves. Thomas nodded thoughtfully, then hugged his father. Thank you for being such a good example of what a husband and father should be. Xander felt emotion thick in his throat as he hugged his son back. Thank you for being such a good man. I am proud of you, Thomas, of all of you kids. You turned out better than I could have hoped. That night, lying in bed with Katherine curled against his side, Xander thought about everything they had built together. It had started with a terrified woman and a lonely man, and a promise to provide safety. But it had grown into this rich, full life surrounded by children and grandchildren and love that seemed to multiply rather than divide. What are you thinking about? Katherine asked sleepily. About promises, Xander said. About how one promise made on a dusty street in Malad City 30 years ago led to all of this. Best promise I ever accepted, Katherine said. Though I was not sure I believed you at the time. I know, Xander said. You were so scared. I could see it in your eyes, but you took a chance on me anyway. Because I saw something in your eyes too, Katherine said. I saw honesty and kindness. I saw a man who meant what he said, and I was right to trust you. They fell silent, comfortable in each other's presence as they had been for decades. Xander listened to Katherine's breathing even out as she fell asleep, that deep, restful sleep she had earned by finally feeling safe. He stayed awake a bit longer, his hand resting on her shoulder, feeling the steady rise and fall of her breath. She had been the girl who slept with one eye open, always vigilant, always afraid. He had been the mountain man who had promised her safety, promised her a place to finally rest. And together, they had created something beautiful. As sleep claimed him, Xander's last thought was one of profound gratitude. He had been given a second chance at love and family, and he had made the most of it. Whatever tomorrow brought, whatever challenges the years ahead held, he knew they would face them together. The mountain wind whispered through the pines outside their cabin, a lullaby that had sung them to sleep for 3 decades. Inside, wrapped in each other's arms, Xander and Katherine Dalton rested deep, safe in the love they had built, secure in the knowledge that they would face whatever came next together. And that, they both knew, was everything that mattered. The end came gently for both of them, as gently as their love had been fierce. Xander was 74 and Katherine was 56 when they passed within hours of each other on a quiet spring morning. Thomas found them in their bed, hands clasped, looking peaceful as if they were simply sleeping. The family buried them together on the mountainside overlooking the valley, with a simple stone marker that read, Xander Dalton and Katherine Dalton, beloved husband and wife, together always. Their children and grandchildren grieved, but they also celebrated the life their parents had shared. 36 years of marriage, 3 children, 9 grandchildren, a legacy of love that would echo through generations. The cabin stayed in the family, passed down through Thomas and eventually to his children. It was expanded and modernized over the years, but the original room remained, the one where Xander and Katherine had first learned to trust each other, to love each other, to build something lasting out of fear and hope. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind sang through the pines, family members swore they could feel the presence of their ancestors, The mountain man and the woman who had finally learned to rest, still watching over the home they had built, still keeping the promises they had made to each other so long ago. Their love story was told and retold across the years, becoming family legend. The story of how Xander Dalton had seen a frightened woman in trouble and had offered her safety. How Katherine Lane had been brave enough to accept that offer. How they had fallen in love in a mountain cabin and built a family that would span generations. It was a story about promises kept and trust earned. About two broken people who had healed each other. About a woman who learned to sleep with both eyes closed and a man who learned to love again. But most of all, it was a story about how the right person at the right time can change everything. How safety and love and patience can transform fear into peace. How two people, choosing each other every day, can create something that lasts forever. And in the mountains of Idaho, where the wind still sings through the pines and the cabin still stands, that love continues to echo. A reminder that the best promises are the ones we keep, and the deepest rest comes when we are finally, truly home.